Support for this podcast comes from the law firm of Davis Malm. Whether you're a developer, property owner, manager, or commercial tenant, their real estate attorneys know the lay of the land, not just the law. Learn more at davismalm.com.
WBUR Podcasts, Boston.
I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and you're listening to The Comment. Deanna Pan, reporter for the Boston Globe's Great Divide team, covering education. Welcome to The Comment.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, indeed. So, Deanna, 9 of the 13 members of the Boston Public Schools English Learners Task Force, which was created to advise the school committee on how to best serve the needs of students learning English, have resigned, and they resigned over the district's new plan to educate English learners. Now, for some folks, I probably just said a lot there. I feel like this needs a bit of unpacking. So to start us off, tell me about the experience of an English learner in BPS schools, and talk to me about the current plan used to educate them.
Right. So English learners currently make up about a third of BPS students. So we're talking about a large number of kids, about 15,000. And these are kids from elementary school, obviously all the way to high school. Many of them are immigrants, particularly recent immigrants. Some of them have had disrupted education. So right now, BPS offers a few different programs for students who are English learners. The best program that they offer, and by best I mean the ones that are the most supported by research, that produce really great outcomes, are their dual language programs. And these are programs where half the students there speak another language than English, half the students speak English, and they are learning both the content and English simultaneously, basically. And you have these students learning together in both languages, their kind of core academic subjects. They do really, really well. Unfortunately, among English learners, this only accounts for 7% of students. So the other 93% of English learners are in various programs where, maybe the outcomes aren't as strong. They are in separate programs, for instance, where they're educated among students who speak the same language, usually with a teacher who doesn't necessarily speak their language, or they're surrounded by students who are also English learners, but maybe don't necessarily speak the same language that they do. So the experiences all vary, but I think everyone in BPS and who cares about education in BPS would agree that, the current way of doing things for teaching students who are learning English isn't working. Their outcomes aren't as good as their peers. They are struggling when it comes to graduation rates, dropout rates. Obviously, there are gaps in standardized test scores.
Thank you for laying that out for us. Now, tell us about the English Learners Task Force, which has been created to help these students.
Right. So the task force was formed by the school committee, and that was in 2009. And this happened because under the Obama administration, the U.S. Department of Education and the U.S. Department of Justice were basically investigating Boston Public Schools and several other urban school districts for violating the civil rights of English learners. And what the U.S. Department of Justice and the Department of Education found in BPS was that the district was not providing them with the kind of specialized type of instruction that English learners need. In response to that, the school committee created this task force of experts, of teachers, of advocates, of former teachers, of dedicated community members who could advise them on how best to meet the needs of this subset of students.
Okay. And what is the task force relationship with the school committee?
Well, the task force would argue, and this is what the resigning members have said, is that the school committee doesn't listen to them, and they feel disempowered. In fact, several of the members were English learners themselves when growing up. And there's this feeling among them that, despite their expertise, despite the, unpaid work they do, and their dedication to the district in this particular issue of teaching English learners, that the school committee is not listening to them, is not taking their advice. So, there's a sense of like, why are we doing what we're doing? And this sense of we don't want to be complicit in a plan that we feel is actually going to do more harm than good.
It sounds like this plan is the straw that broke the camel's back for most of them. What is in this plan? What does it look like? When does it go into effect?
Right. So on October 18th, the district leaders of BPS, they unveiled this plan to overhaul both its special education and multilingual programs. So what this plan does specifically for English learners is the idea that instead of spending most of their days or their entire school days in these separate kind of programs that I described to you earlier, that they would be moved into the sort of general education setting with their English-speaking peers. And while they're there, they would only either be pulled out or they might receive, instruction in their native language, basically only as needed. And these changes will start taking place next year for grades K through 8, and then the following year after that for high school.
We're going to take a break, but we'll be right back.
Did you kill Marlene Johnson?
I think you're one of the first people to have actually asked.
From WBUR and ZSP Media, this is Beyond All Repair, a new podcast about an unsolved murder that will leave you questioning everything.
Somebody should be in jail for murdering my sister.
A woman who's never been believed.
As long as they think I have done this, then they're not looking for who actually did this.
And that's what makes it a cold case.
No, it's a botched case.
And a search for the truth, once and for all.
Wow, it just gets more interesting.
Beyond All Repair. Listen and follow wherever you get your podcasts.
Be careful. You're digging in a place that's been very peaceful for a while.
Do it anyway. Dig.
And we're back with more from Deanna Pan of the Boston Globe. Why did 9 of the 13 members of the English Learners Task Force resign? What exactly were their issues with this new plan?
Right. So 8 of the 9 members, they wrote this letter to the school committee, to the mayor, to the superintendent, basically spelling out why exactly they were doing this. And their biggest issue is that they feel this new plan, in the letter they call it harmful and a sort of compromised direction. And they argue that it will actually lead to worse outcomes for English learners, including, higher dropout rates and even disciplinary issues. But anyway, so what these task force members have been arguing and advocating for consistently over the years is for BPS to expand what they call native language instruction. So this is instruction in core content areas, think science, social studies, math, in English language learners, students' native tongue. So instead of learning English, speaking chemistry, they would learn it from a teacher who speaks their language, understands their culture. And the idea is that this would help them to better master the subject matter, at least until they master enough English where they can transition to the general education classroom and still, be able to understand the material and do well.
Right. So I'm thinking back to a few years ago when I was interested in French. I would go to these French meetups and immerse myself. And I'm talking to people from France, and they're talking to me all fast and stuff. Some days I was keeping up, some days I wasn't. But I will tell you that after those meetups, it felt like a workout, like a mental workout. So now I'm imagining if you're a student in a classroom and you are already faced with learning this new language, which is a complex exercise, on top of subjects like science, math, that's just overload. Is it that these task force members want a plan that is sensitive to that mental workload for a student?
Exactly. And that is
Yeah.
essentially what these task force members are saying, is that this would just be, inappropriate for them, and that then you're going to see, these bad outcomes when it comes to test scores, when it comes to dropout rates, graduation rates, things like that. And, here I should note that BPS, has a lot of issues with and disputes actually that the task force members, characterization of their inclusion plan. What the district leaders have said is that, we're not putting students, for example, in these English only, quote unquote environments. They may be in these general classrooms with their English speaking peers, but they're going to have access to native language instruction. But, task force members again say this is not sufficient. Meanwhile, even school committee members have pointed out we have a real staffing issue that's going to come into play. It's already very difficult to find teachers who not only speak languages other than English, but can speak languages other than English in a way that would allow them to teach complex coursework.
Okay. Well, speaking of staffing and support, have you talked to anybody who is working with students, teachers, families, any other staff, or hell, students themselves,
Right. So I spoke to a former teacher who now has a different role in BPS, but she used to teach English learners in the high school setting. And, one point that she thought was really important to make is again, when we talk about English learners, we're talking about a, diverse group of students. And we're talking also about students who are, again, at the elementary level and at the secondary level. And the challenges that students face at the elementary level, at the secondary level, are going to be very different. And you can imagine how learning content material as, say, a second grader would be very, very different than learning English, learning content material as, say, a freshman or sophomore in high school. And in a way, the students who are at the high school level will have some of the most challenges. I mean, these are when kids are at greatest risk of dropping out. These are the kids who are most likely to have disrupted formal education, because of their, the places where they grew up, because of their migration patterns. They may even have, trauma associated with that.
And other responsibilities, is that fair to say as well?
Yeah, exactly. And a lot of times these kids, she was telling me, these are, a lot of times new immigrant kids who have other responsibilities to, take care of themselves, take care of their families. It can be, very isolating as a new immigrant, particularly one who doesn't speak English, just to be in high school, right? Surrounded by kids who don't come from your culture, who don't speak your language. A lot of times, these kids, for example, she'll say that they don't participate in sports, they don't participate in clubs. But one thing she said is that they do find kind of comfort in, and the fact that they're able to talk and become friends with, kids from similar backgrounds as them, who speak their same language, or even with teachers who are also able to communicate with them and their families, and who understand a little bit about where they're coming from, and who crucially have that desire to work with these students. When you're a teacher who chooses to work with students who are English learners, you're kind of coming at this from a different perspective than, say, a teacher who didn't necessarily make that choice, but still has those students, in his or her classroom.
Understood. Well, Deanna, thank you so much for coming through to The Common.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And I'm always happy to be here to talk about anything BPS or education related.
That's Deanna Pan, reporter for the Boston Globe's Great Divide team covering education. And that's our show for today. Thank you so much for listening to The Common. Hey, if you want to get in touch with us, hit us up on Instagram at WBUR-The-Common or send us an email at thecommon@wbur.org. I'm Daryl C. Murphy, and I will talk to you tomorrow.